World of Warcraft, Tides of Darkness, by Aaron Rosenberg. Chapter 5. 2 days after the first meeting, Lothar found himself back in the Lordaeron throne room with the continent's rulers. Khadgar had accompanied him again, and Lothar was glad of the lad's presence. Taranis was a kindly host and a good man, as were some of the other monarchs, but the young wizard was the only one Lothar had known from Azeroth. Even though the young man was not native to Stormwind, his presence reminded Lothar of home. Home. A place that no longer existed. Lothar knew he would have to accept that at some point. It still seemed unreal for now. He kept expecting to turn and see Lane laughing, or look up and watch a pair of griffins gliding by, or hear the sound of his men marshalling in the courtyard. But all that was gone now. Their friends were dead. Their home had fallen, and he vowed to keep this land from falling into darkness, even if it cost him his life. Right now, he thought it more likely to cost him his sanity. Lothar had never had much patience for politics, and had watched amazed over the years as Lane placed this noble and that one, easing arguments, defusing conflicts, settling disputes, all the while never favoring any one over the other or letting personal interests interfere with the affairs of state. It was all a game, Lane had told him over and over again, a game of positioning and influence and subtle maneuvering. No one really won, not for long, and the goal was simply to maintain the strongest position possible for as long as possible. From what Lothar had seen, this continent's monarchs were experts at the game, and being forced to deal with them supposedly as equal was driving him to his wits' end. After lunch that first day, they had returned to the throne room for more discussion. Everyone seemed to accept the idea that the Horde would come, even that too smooth Paranold. Now the question was what to do about it. They had taken the rest of the day to convince everyone that the unified army was the only answer. Taranis had agreed at once. Fortunately, as had Trollbane and Proudmoore, had taken a little coaxing, but Paranold and Greymane had been more difficult. Lothar wasn't surprised at Paranold's reluctance. He'd known similar men back in Stormwind, smooth and silky and nasty and always out for themselves, at any cost. More often than not, they had turned out to be cowards. Paranoid was probably afraid of battle personally, and extended that to his subjects, many of whom were no doubt braver than he was. Greymane was a surprise, however. The man certainly looked the warrior, with that powerful frame and his heavy armor, nor had he stated that he would not fight. But he had been quick to suggest other options every time the talk had turned back toward war, and Paranoid, of course, had insisted on examining each suggestion in great detail. It was only after Proudmoore and Trollbane all but accused Greymane of cowardice that the burly men had agreed an army was their only recourse. The second day had been more of the same. They had settled on the idea of war, at least, but now there were logistics of cooperation to consider. Which armies would supply what troops, where they would be stationed, how they would be supplied, details Lothar had dealt with himself for years, but only for one nation's militia. Now they were dealing with 5, not counting any Stormwind survivors he could muster, and each king had his own idea and his own methods. And of course, the biggest question was the one of command. Each king seemed to feel he should have command of the unified army. Taranis pointed out that Lordaeron was the largest kingdom with the most troops, and also he was the one who had summoned the rest of them. Trollbane claimed to have the most actual fighting experience. At looking at the gruff mountain king, Lothar believed him. Proudmoore mentioned the power of his navy and the importance of ships for troop transport and supplies. Greymane's was the most southern of the kingdoms, and he seemed to feel that meant he should have command because his lands would be first overrun if the Horde approached on foot. Even though that wasn't true, since Stormguard actually was foremost along the path the Horde would take from Khazmodan to Dunmore. And on and on. Parents suggests that brute force alone was not enough, but the commander should have intelligence, wisdom, and vision, all which he felt he possessed in abundance. And then there were the two non-kings, each a leader in his own right. Archbishop Fowl, whose followers include most of the people from all the kingdoms combined, and Archmage Antonidas, who essentially ruled a single city, but whose people's power likely matched the strength of any army they could muster. Fortunately, the two men, the one short and friendly, the other tall and stern, were not interested in control of the army. They had both played a moderating influence, keeping the king's focus on the fact that the horde would come whether an army was ready to face them or not, and reminding the monarchs frequently that an army without a single leader was useless no matter its size. Lothar had watched the discussions with a mixture of amusement and horror. Leaning more toward the latter himself, he himself was drawn more frequently to the conversation. At times he was called upon as the resident orc expert. Other times they wanted his opinion as an outsider. A few times had even left a deciding voice to him, pointing out shyly that his family had been the original rulers of this land, and thus in some sense he should have some ancestral right to that effect. Half the time Lothar couldn't tell if they were mocking him or admiring him, and he knew severely the kings wanted something from him, but that something seemed to change from moment to moment. He'd be much happier when these discussions were over and done, and he could return to the rest of the Stormwind refugees and try to assemble at least a small force to aid in the army's might. As he waited for King Ternus to call the morning council to order, however, Lothar realized the other monarchs were watching him closely. Some, like Trollbane, were doing so openly. Others, like Paranoid and Greymane, were more subtle about it, sneaking glances now and again. Lothar wasn't sure what was going on, but he didn't like it. "We are all here, then?" Ternus asked. Though, of course, he could see this was the case, Lordaeron's king did not miss much. "Good. Now then, we have all agreed that this time is of the essence, if we are to marshal our united forces to meet the horde when it arrives, and we have agreed upon a course of action." Each of the other monarchs nodded, which surprised and further worried Lothar. They had still been arguing when he had given up and returned to his room late last night. When they had reached an agreement, and what was it about? But the king's next words told him clearly, and Lothar's blood ran cold as he heard the announcement clearly. "Then I hereby declare the founding of the Alliance of Lordaeron. We shall stand together as one, as our ancestors did long ago in the Arathi Empire." The others nodded, and Ternus continued, "And it is only fitting, then, that our commander should hail from that ancient ruling stock. We, the kings of the Alliance, do hereby appoint Lord Anduin Lothar, champion of Stormwind, as our supreme commander." Lothar stared at Ternus, who winked at him. "It was the only way, really," the Lordaeron monarch explained quietly. His voice soft enough Lothar knew he was the only one to hear. "Each of them wanted to be in charge, and they were dead set against seeing another king in place. You aren't a king, so they don't feel anyone has gotten special treatment. But your bloodline makes you noble enough they don't feel slighted at being passed over." The king leaned forward. "I know it is a great deal to ask of you, and I apologize. I would not ask if it were not for your very survival, as you yourself warned us. Will you accept the charge?" His last words were spoken more loudly. Ternus' voice shifting back to formality, and silence crept across the room as the others all waited for Lothar's answer. It did not take him long. He did not really have a choice, and Ternus knew it. He could not walk away from this. Not now, not after all that had happened. "I accept the charge," he replied, his voice ringing through the chamber. "I will lead the Alliance army against the horde." "Very good." Ternus clapped his hands. "We shall each now go to assemble our troops, gear, and supplies. I suggest we meet again in 1 week to present our rosters and inventories to Lord Lothar so that he may see what forces he has at his disposal and begin his planning. The other kings muttered or nodded their agreement. Each one in turn came up to Lothar to congratulate him on his appointment and pledge their full support, though from Perinold and Greymane the statement seemed less sincere. Then the kings were gone, leaving only 4 in the room. Lothar glanced at Khadgar, who actually grinned at him. "Out of the frying pan, eh?" the young old mage asked, shaking his head. "And you let them talk you into that, those clever bastards. They'll sell you their own children if they thought they would win them even a single acre more on their domains. I particularly liked the way they just assumed you would accept. But that's what happens when you have authority over others. You stop realizing that anyone else matters, much less has a say in the events." The cough cut off whatever else the young wizard meant to say. He looked up at one of the other men present, embarrassment plain on his face for once. "Not all authority is corrupt and self-serving, young man," Archbishop Fowl pointed out, his normally jovial face stern. "There are those of us called to service by leading, just as your friend here was." "Of course, Father. Please forgive me. I did not mean to imply. I was referring to those of temporal authority only. You, of course." It was the first time Lothar had ever seen the normally smooth Khadgar too flustered for words, and he couldn't help chuckling at his young companion's predicament. Fowl was laughing as well, in such a good-natured way Khadgar himself soon joined. "Enough, lad," Fowl said at last, raising one palm. "I do not blame you for your outburst, and Lord Lothar was certainly maneuvered neatly into that trap. I must confess, however, that I too lent my weight to that decision. You are a good man, sir, and I believe you are our best possible choice for the Alliance commander. I, for one, feel better knowing you'll be planning our battles and leading our forces." "Thank you, Father." Lothar had never been a religious man, but he had a great deal of respect for the Church of the Light, and everything he had seen of Fowl thus far had impressed him. To hear the Archbishop praising him so warmly left him uncomfortable, but proud. "You both will be tested during the course of this conflict," Fowl warned, his voice somehow deeper and richer than before, as if casting a pronouncement from some great height. "You will be pushed to the very limits, not just of your talents, but of your courage and your resolve. I believe you both capable of enduring such challenges, however, and of emerging victorious. I pray the Holy Light fills you with strength and purity, and that you find within it the joy and unity you need to survive and conquer." His hand rose in a benediction, and Lothar thought he saw a faint glow around the limb, a glow that spread to Khadgar and him. He felt a sense of peace and serenity, and a surge of inacceptable happiness. "Now, on other matters." Suddenly Fowl was just a man again, if an old and wise one. "First, what can you tell me of Northshire, particularly the abbey there? Did it survive?" "I'm afraid not, Father," Lothar replied. "The abbey is gone, torn to pieces. A few of the clerics survived and are in South Shore with the rest of our people. The rest..." He shook his head. "I see." Fowl had turned pale, but retained his composure. "I will pray for them." He fell silent, clearly lost in thought, and Lothar and Khadgar waited respectfully. After a moment, the Archbishop glanced up at them, and there was a new resolve in his gaze. "You will need lieutenants for your army, sir," he announced. And I think it best if some of those came not from the kingdoms, but from the church. I have several in mind, and a new order that I believe will prove valuable to the Alliance. I will require a few days to work out the details and select appropriate candidates. Shall we say 4 days from now, in the main courtyard, after the noon meal? I believe you will not be disappointed. He nodded pleasantly and then walked away without hurrying, but with a steady stride. That left one other. Antonidas had been watching them without a word, and now the elderly mage approached them. The might and wisdom of the Curator are at your disposal, sir, he told Lothar. I know you are acquainted with our fellow wizards in Stormwind, so you have some sense of our capabilities. I shall appoint one of our number to assist you and serve as our liaison. The powerful wizard paused, his eyes flickering to Lothar's side so quickly he almost missed it, and Lothar suppressed a smile. I would ask for Khadgar to fill that role, sir, Lothar stated, catching the smile that touched the Archmage's lips for just an instant. He is already a trusted companion, and has faced the orcs with me more than once. Of course. Antonidas turned to the younger man. Then, surprisingly, he reached out, cupping Khadgar's chin with one hand and raising his head to study his face. You have suffered much, the Archmage said softly, and Lothar could see the sorrow and sympathy in the older man's eyes. Your experience has marked you, and far more than just your appearance. Khadgar pulled his head away, but gently. I did what had to be done, he replied quietly, rubbing absently at the chin where Antonidas touched, had irritated the white beard hairs beginning to sprout there. Antonidas frowned. As we all must. He sighed, and seemed to shake off whatever heavy thoughts had burdened him, and returned to the matter at hand. You shall keep us appraised of the situation on the field, young Khadgar, and communicate Lord Lothar's needs and requests as quickly as possible. You shall also coordinate the efforts of any other magi present. I trust this within your capabilities. Khadgar nodded. Good. I shall expect you at Dalaran at your earliest convenience. Then we may discuss other important matters and consider how we may best help the Alliance. The gem at the top of the Archmage's staff flared in the light, an answering gleam danced from the gem at the crest of the skull cap right between his eyes. Then Antonidas seemed to blur and fade, and suddenly he was gone. He wants to know about Medivh, Khadgar said, several seconds after the Archmage had vanished. Of course. Lothar turned and led the younger man out of the throne room, back into the rest of the palace. There he turned and began to walk in the direction of the dining hall. What should I tell him? The young wizard fell into step beside him. Tell him the truth, Lothar replied, shrugging and hoping the gesture looked casual. Inside, his stomach churned. They need to know what happened. Khadgar nodded, though he did not look pleased. I will tell them, he said finally. But I can't wait until after lunch. That can wait till after lunch, he grinned, an expression that showed his true age despite the hair and wrinkles. The horde itself could not keep me from food right now. Lothar laughed. Let us hope it does not come to that. A few days later, Lothar and Khadgar returned to the main courtyard. They had eaten and drunk their fill and were now waiting for Archbishop Fowl to arrive. He appeared a few minutes and walked calmly out to meet them. Thank you for indulging me, the Archbishop said as he reached him. I will not take up your time, but I believe this may prove of great help to you and to the Alliance. But first, he announced, I will tell you, Sir Lothar, that the Church has pledged itself to Stormwind's aid. We shall gather funds to help you rebuild your kingdom once the immediate crisis is past. Lothar smiled, one of the first genuine smiles Khadgar had seen from him since Stormwind had fallen. "Thank you, father," he said, his voice husk with gratitude. "That means a great deal to me, and will to Prince Varian as well." Fal nodded. "The holy lights will fill your home once more," he promised, gently, and then paused and studied both of them in turn. "When we spoke last," Fal began, pacing before them, "you told me of the Northshire Abbey's destruction. I was dismayed and wondered how the rest of my clergy could possibly survive this war that approaches so rapidly. Clearly these orcs are a threat even to sturdy warriors like yourself. How then can a mere priest defend himself, much less his congregation?" He smiled, a truly beneficent expression. And as I felt these concerns, an idea appeared to me, as if bought by the holy light itself. There had to be a way to ensure that warriors fought for the light and with the light, using both its gifts for their own martial prowess and still be behaved in the manner appropriate to the church's teachings. "And you found a way?" Lothar asked. "I have," Fal agreed. "I will establish a new branch of the church, the Paladins. I've already selected the first candidates for this order. Some were knights before, but others were priests. I chose these men for both their piety and their martial prowess. They will be trained not only in war, but in prayer and in healing. And each of these vigilant fighters will possess both martial and spiritual power, particularly in blessing themselves and others with the strength of the holy light." He turned and beckoned, and 4 men emerged from the nearby passage, walking briskly over to Fal. They each wore a gleaming plate with the symbol of the church emblazoned upon their chest, upon their shield, and upon the crest of their helm. Each man carried a sword, and Lothar could see from the way they walked that these men knew how to handle themselves. But the armor and weapons were still new, and utterly unstained and undented. They had the knowledge and training, but Lothar wondered if any of these men had ever faced real combat. Those who had been warriors before must have, though perhaps only against human foes. But the former priests were most likely experienced only in sparring with their fellows. They would be going up against orcs almost immediately. "I present Uther, Staden Dathoran, Tyrion Forgering, and Turellion." Fal was beaming like a proud father. "These will be the knights of the Silver Hand." He introduced Lothar and Khadgar as well. "This is Anduin Lothar, champion of Stormwind and commander of the Alliance, and his companion the wizard Khadgar of Darlaran." Fal smiled. "I shall leave you 6 to discuss matters." And he did, leaving Lothar and Khadgar surrounded by the Paladin candidates. Some of them, like the lad Turellion, seemed overwhelmed. Others, like Uther and Tyrion, were more relaxed. Uther took the lead, speaking while Lothar was still wondering what to say to them. "My lord, the Archbishop has told us of the upcoming battle, and of the Horde's approach. We are at your service, and at the service of your people. Use us as you see fit. We would smite our enemies and drive them forth, shielding this land with holy light." He was a tall, powerfully built man with strong, vaguely familiar features and stern eyes the color of the ocean. Lothar could feel the man's piety as an almost physical presence, very much like Fal's own, but lacking the Archbishop's warmth. "You were a knight before?" he asked. "Aye, my lord," the Paladin candidate replied, "but I've been a follower of the Church and a devout believer in the Holy Light since my youth. I first met the Archbishop when he was merely Bishop Fal, and he was kind enough to serve as my spiritual advisor and my mentor. I was honored when he told me of his plans for this new order and offered me a place among them. Uther's jaw tightened. With the coming of these foul creatures, I know we will need the light's blessing to defeat them and protect our lands, our homes, and our people. Lothar nodded. He could understand why this man had turned to faith as an answer, or at least part of an answer, and he had no doubt Uther would be a powerful force on the battlefield. But something about the man's zeal unnerved him. He suspected Uther was too focused upon honor and faith to use less noble methods of success, and that would not hold well here. Lothar himself had learned from bitter experience that when dealing with the orcs, honor alone was not enough. To survive against the horde, they would have to use every means necessary. He and Khadgar spent the next hour or more speaking with the 4 potential paladins, and Lothar was pleased to see that his young friend was also sounding them out. After the holy warriors had left to attend afternoon prayers, Lothar turned to the old-seeming wizard. "Well," he asked, "what do you think of them?" Khadgar frowned. "I have no doubt they will be much use to us." "I doubt they will be much use to us," he said after a moment. "Oh? Why is that?" "They have no time to prepare," the wizard explained. "We anticipate the horde to reach Lordaeron in a matter of weeks, if not less. And none of these men have seen battle. Not as paladins. At least, I've no doubt they can fight. But we have warriors aplenty. If the archbishops expect them to perform miracles, I'm afraid he'll be disappointed." Lothar nodded. "I agree," he admitted. "But Fowl has faith in them, and perhaps we must as well." He grinned. "Amusing, they are really, somehow. What is your opinion of them, then?" "Uther will be dangerous to the horde, that is certain," Khadgar replied. "But I do not think he can command men other than fellow paladins. His piety is too strong, too abrasive for most soldiers to endure." Lothar nodded for his companion to continue. "Saladin and Tyrion are much the same. Saladin was a knight first, and Tyrion a warrior. But they have since found faith, and that may make them hesitant to use tactics they might have appreciated as simple fighters." Lothar smiled. "And Tyrion?" "The least of them in faith, and thus the highest in my eyes," Khadgar admitted with a grin. "He was trained for priesthood, and is a loyal church follower, but lacks the blinding zeal of the others. He also sees farther than them, and has more wit." "I agree." The young man had impressed Lothar as well. Tyrion had been hesitant to speak at first, and after a few minutes the reason became clear. He had heard of Lothar and his deeds in Stormwind, and seemed awed, a fact that made Lothar uncomfortable, though it was not the first time he had faced it. Many youths back home had worshipped him as well, and begged him to train them and induct them into his guard. But after overcoming that initial reserve, Tyrion had proven to be a bright young man with an agile mind, and more appreciation for subtleties and shades than his fellows. Lothar had liked him right away. The fact that Khadgar felt the same only confirmed his opinion. "I will speak to Fowl," Lothar said at least. "The paladins will no doubt be valued assets, and I will take Uther as our liaison to them, and to any other forces the church can supply." Something else occurred to him. "I will propose an additional candidate as well," he said. "Gavinrad. He was one of my knights in Azeroth, the most faithful of us, and a good man. I suggest he would make a fine paladin." He smiled. "But Tyrion I will take to serve as one of my lieutenants." Khadgar nodded. "A good choice, I say." He shook his head. "Now let us hope the horde gives us time to prepare them for the rest of our forces." "We will repair what we can," Lothar answered, pragmatically, already thinking of how to disposition whatever troops the king supplied, and we will face them when we must. There is little else we can do. Chapter 6. Gul'dan was furious. "Why have you not succeeded yet?" he demanded. The other orcs cowered away from him. They had seen the chief warlock enraged before, and knew he might turn his fearsome powers upon them as well if he was not appeased. "We are trying, Gul'dan," Rakmar replied, the oldest of the surviving orc necromancers, after Gul'dan himself. Rakmar Sharpfang was the Necrolites' unofficial leader, and often thrust into a role of conveying their accomplishments or failures to the High Warlock. "We have been able to animate the bodies, yes, but not give them consciousness. They are little more than shells. We can direct them as puppets, but their movements are sloppy and slow. They will pose little threat to anyone." Gul'dan glared at the bodies before Rakmar. They were human warriors slain here on the field of Stormwind, and would make a powerful force for the Horde, just as he had promised Doomhammer, but only if his worthless assistants could transform them into something more than shabbling wrecks he saw here. "Find a way!" Gul'dan shouted, spit flying from his mouth. He clenched his fist, tempted to strike down the Necrolites where they stood. But what good would that do him if they were dead? They would hardly be able to help him. A thought struck him, and Gul'dan rocked back on his heels, stunned by his brilliance. Of course! That was the answer. "You're right, Rakmar," he said softly, opening his hands and smoothing them along the front of his robes. "You are trying. I understand. This is new and different, things we are attempting, and would pose a great challenge to anyone. I have no right to be angry that you have not succeeded. Please return to work. I will leave you in peace to experiment once more." Thank you," Rakmar stumbled, his eyes wide. Gul'dan could see the lesser orc was surprised by his sudden change of heart, as were the other warlocks behind him. He suppressed a chuckle, simply nodding to them and turning away. Let them think he had thought better of his outburst, or even that he had become distracted by something else and forgotten why he had been so angry at them. Let them think whatever they liked. Soon it would not matter. As he walked, Gul'dan glanced around. Cho'Gall was nearby, as always. The ogre mage had been crouched within a ruined building not far away. Close enough to be ready if Gul'dan should need him, but far enough away that the other Necrolites would not see him and become unnerved by his presence. Gul'dan beckoned, and the two-headed ogre rose and approached, his long strides quickly covering the distance between them. "The Necrolites have served their purpose," Gul'dan told his towering lieutenant. "Now they shall have a new one, a greater one." He grinned, stroking his beard with anticipation. "Gather our implements. We shall make a sacrifice." "We are summoning our father brethren?" Rakmar asked softly. He and the other Necrolites were standing around the altar Gul'dan and Cho'Gall had built, as ordered. But Gul'dan could see they were trying to decipher its purpose. Let them. By the time they did, it would be too late. "Yes," Gul'dan replied, concentrating on the incantation he was about to perform. "Doomhammer slaughtered the other warlocks, but their souls linger. We will summon them and install them in human bodies." He grinned. "They will be eager to return to this world and serve the Horde once more." Rakmar nodded. "That will animate them," he agreed. But will it give them power, or will they be little more than walking corpses? Gul'dan frowned, surprised and not pleased that the Necrolite had figured that out so quickly. "Silence!" he commanded, foreseeing other questions. "We begin." He began the ritual, summoning his magics to him and feeling it fill him with power. Not enough power, but soon that would change. In the meantime, he concentrated on his task, channeling his energies into the altar before them, priming them for the transformation he was about to invoke. Rakmar and the other Necrolites joined in, lending their own necromantic magics to his incantations. Thus they were distracted, and did not notice that Gul'dan had moved from his position until it was too late. Gul'dan could not stop the growl from escaping his lips, but it did not matter. He was already positioned right behind Rakmar, curved dagger at the ready, and as the taller orc turned, Gul'dan's blade lashed out, catching the Necrolite full across the throat. Blood arced out, spraying both, and Rakmar toppled backwards, clutching at the wound, gasping for air. He fell onto the altar and gasped with horror as he tried to push himself away from it. But Gul'dan was on top of him, straddling the fading Necrolite, and batted his hands away. Then he plunged the dagger into Rakmar's chest, wrenching it about to create a gaping hole. Into this he reached and, with a sharp tug, removed Rakmar's still beating heart. But his former assistant's eyes, Gul'dan cast the spell he had prepared, his magic enveloping the bloody organ and trapping Rakmar's spirit within. The magic of the altar surged up, then reshaping the heart, shrinking it and hardening it and granting it an unnatural luster. As the Necrolite collapsed, his body now an empty shell, Gul'dan grinned down at him and held up the glowing gem. "Do not fear, Rakmar," he assured the dead orc. "This is not the end for you. On the contrary, you succeeded in your task with my help. You will fight again for the Horde, and Doomhammer will have his undead warriors." He laughed. "That is the good thing about necromancers. We never let anything go to waste." He glanced up. Cho'Gall had killed several more Necrolites already, preserving their hearts and souls as jewels in the same manner. The rest were cowering, their magic still caught up in the altar, unable to flee, and too terrified to fight. Gul'dan snorted. Worthless. He would have fought. But this made matters easier for him, at least. He laughed as he rose and stalked towards the remaining warlocks, licking the blood from his tusks as he approached. Soon they would be warlike enough for even the most bloodthirsty commander. Well, Doomhammer asked as he strode into the field. "Have you succeeded?" He did not expect Gul'dan to notice the war chief's words. It did not escape Gul'dan's notice that the war chief's words were similar to those he had shouted at his Necrolites mere days earlier. But this time the answer was very different. "I have, noble Doomhammer," he responded, gesturing at the bodies behind him. Doomhammer shouldered past him to glare at the figures, which lay stretched out on the ground. "These are fallen Stormwind soldiers," Doomman snarled. "What of them?" "Or did you ask me here to show me you could line bodies up so neatly?" He sneered. "This is the extent of your powers, then, Gul'dan. To prepare corpses for burial." Gul'dan longed to wipe the smirk from his leader's face, to show the arrogant warrior the true extent of his magic. But now was not the time. "Of course not," he did reply, the words still sharp enough to make Doomhammer's gaze narrow. Watch. He nodded to Cho'Gall, who knelt beside the first body and placed a jewel tricon in its cold, stiff hands. These enchanted weapons had been the most time-consuming part of the process, but Gul'dan knew without them, his new force would be far less powerful, just as Rakmar had guessed. Fortunately, he and Cho'Gall had been experimenting with such items already for their own purposes, so they had merely modified the spell they had planned and adapted the weapon to this new role. As he and Doomhammer watched, the corpse stirred, its fingers closing tightly around the truncheon, which began to glow. The light spread to the body's hands, and then all along its arm, slowly infusing the entire form with a green aura. And then the corpse opened its eyes. Doomhammer started slightly, though he made no sound, and this time it was Gul'dan's lips that pulled back into a sneer. Still, he could not blame the war chief for being startled. He found the sight almost unnerving himself, and he had created the creatures. The corpse slowly rose to his feet, its movement stiff at first, but becoming more fluid by the second. It turned its glowing red eyes upon Gul'dan, and the orc warlock saw them widen in recognition. "You have succeeded, Gul'dan," the creature stated, its words slurred using an unfamiliar jaw. Its strange, too small teeth. It stared down at itself, at its limbs and torso, and raised an empty hand to feel its face. "You have returned my spirit to this world." It laughed, a harsh sound that was far more orc-like than human. "Excellent. Welcome back, Terran Gorefiend," Gul'dan replied, trying to keep the laughter from his voice. "Yes, I have brought you back to further serve the Horde." Doomhammer stepped forward, studying the strange creature before him. "Gorefiend? One of your warlocks from the Shadow Council. I killed him myself." "We all give ourselves to the Horde," Gul'dan replied mockingly, bowing low so Doomhammer could not see his expression. "Gorefiend's soul had not departed this plane. I merely recalled it and found it a new home. Only now his very body is imbued with sorcery. He is more powerful now than ever, and the other warlocks with him." Cho'Gall had continued his task, and behind Gorefiend, the other bodies were rising as well. "This, then, is what you give me," Doomhammer rumbled. "Corpses of warriors, powered by your dead acolytes." His face twisted in disgust. "You asked for warriors," Gul'dan reminded him sharply. "I have provided them. They will be a match for anything the humans have and more, and though their bodies may be rotted, human flesh, they are still orc in spirit and in allegiance. And they still wield their magics as well. Think what that will do in battle." Doomhammer nodded slowly, clearly considering. "Will you serve me?" he asked Gorefiend, showing what Gul'dan considered a fatal weakness. War chiefs did not ask, they commanded, though perhaps with creatures such as these it was best not to anger them. Gorefiend considered for a moment, glowing eyes studying the war chief. At last he nodded. "Gul'dan is correct," he said finally, in his voice raspy. "I am still an orc, despite the shell. I live for the Horde, and I will serve you and our people." He grinned, a horrible rictus. You killed me, but I do not hold that against you, for it has resulted in this powerful new form. I am well pleased with the trade. The other bodies nodded behind him. Good. Doomhammer stepped forward and clapped the surprised Gorfin on the shoulder, a gesture of respect to an equal rather than a subordinate. You shall be my Death Knights, the forefront of our great horde, he informed the reanimated creatures. Together, we will crush the humans and take their land, making this world safe for our people. Then he turned and nodded at Gul'dan, though it seemed grudging. You have done as you promised, Gul'dan. Doomhammer admitted. You have given me a powerful force against our foes. I thank you for that. Of course, noble Doomhammer, Gul'dan replied, hoping he sounded more sincere than he felt. Anything for our people. Fool, he thought, as he watched Doomhammer stride off, the newly awakened Death Knights beside him. Take them and go. Yes, return to your war. I have other matters to attend, and now that you are satisfied, I will have the freedom to concentrate on them properly. I will play the loyal warlock a little while longer, he vowed, but not forever. Soon enough I will have what I seek, and then you and the Horde may crumble away for all I care. I will raise a new race to replace you all, one loyal to me, alone. And we shall reshape this world in my image. Huh. A week later, Doomhammer addressed the assembled horde. They were gathering before the fortress Zul'jin told him was called Blackrock Spire, a massive structure built from the same glossy black stone that dominated the landscape. It stood atop Blackrock Mountain, the tallest of the Burning Steppes mountain range that rose up along the continent, dividing east from west. Zuluhead had led them here, sensing the power within the mountains, and after defeating the handful of dwarves dwelling here, Doomhammer acclaimed it. He had felt it was a good omen that this place, which he had selected as the Horde's base, bore the same name as his own clan. Below him, the orcs of every clan were gathered, waiting eagerly to hear what he had to say. They had conquered this land thoroughly, and while that gave them far better hunting and far richer lands than any left back home, it was still not enough to contain their entire race comfortably. There was also the question of retaliation. They had driven the humans from this continent, but there was no guarantee they would not return with reinforcements or perhaps allies. Doomhammer grinned, but now he had allies of his own. My people, he shouted, raising his hammer high above him. Hear me! The crowd quieted, every face turning toward him. We have taken this land, and it is good. A cheer erupted, and Doomhammer waited for it to die down before speaking again. This world is rich with life, and we can raise strong families here. Another cheer. Yet it is not without its defenders. The humans are strong and skilled, and fight hard to retain what is theirs. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the horde. There was no weakness in acknowledging a powerful foe, and the humans were certainly that. Enough orcs had fought them now to agree. We must continue our conquest, Doomhammer told his people, gesturing to the north with his hammer. Another land, Lordaeron, lies beyond this one, and once we control it, our clans may claim territories, settle, craft homes, and raise families again. But first, We must take it from the humans, and they will not surrender it lightly. The crowd growled as one, showing a willingness to fight on. Doomhammer quieted them with a raised hand. I know that you are strong, he assured them. I know that you are warriors and will not falter in battle. But the humans are many, and this time they will be ready for us. He leaned on his hammer. But will they be ready for our allies? He gestured behind him, and Zul'jin stepped forward. The forest troll leader had brought 100 of his people for this meeting, and they stood now, arrayed behind him and Doomhammer, hacking their axes and short, carved swords and wicked broaded spears. These are the forest trolls, Doomhammer told the orcs below. They are now a part of the horde and will fight alongside us. They are as mighty as an ogre and as crafty as an orc. And in woodcraft, they are unsurpassed. They will be our guides, our scouts, and our forest warriors. Zul'jin stepped forward, his long scarf waving in the wind. We have be pledging to the horde, he declared, his voice carrying cleanly despite the fabrics covering his mouth. We be fighting with you, and together we be crushing the humans and elves and any other who stand against us. The orcs cheered, as did the forest trolls, and Zul'jin nodded before stepping back. Nor are they our only allies, Doomhammer announced. He turned and Gorfin strode forward. The other Death Knights beside him. They had masked themselves to conceal their hideous features, with heavy cloth wraps around their heads and faces so that only their glowing eyes were visible. But the horde could see that beneath the breadth of their shoulders and the width of their chests, and Gorfin raised his truncheon high, and the weapon's jewels flaring into brightness that rivaled the sun overhead. We are the Death Knights, Gorfin intoned, his strange voice casting the words across the crowd like a chill over the land. We have pledged ourselves to the Horde and to Doomhammer. We will fight as one of you, and will drive the orcs' foes from this world. It requested that Doomhammer not reveal their true nature to the other orcs, and Doomhammer have agreed. Many might not be happy to learn that these new warriors were orcs themselves, former warlocks he had slaughtered, and Gul'dan had trapped within rotting human bodies. The Death Knights will be our cavalry and our vanguard, Doomhammer announced. They are strong and swift, and pose a dark magic to strip away our foes' defenses. He paused. And we may have other allies soon as well, he admitted. He had hoped that these would be ready as well, but Zulu had said his clan needed more time to finish with preparations. Still, this was enough for now. We march north, Doomhammer told his people, across this land into Cosmodan, the home of the dwarves. Those lands are rich with metals and with fuel. We shall take those resources and use them to build a mighty fleet of ships. With those ships, our forces will sail north to Lordaeron, where the humans will not expect us by water. We shall land to the west and march back, catching them from behind. We will crush them, and then we shall rule the land, and all this world is our own. The horde cheered again, and a cheer that grew and grew until it echoed from the rocks around them. Doomhammer felt the echo beneath his feet, shaking the very peak, and glanced back at Zuluhead, who stood behind him. His people's shouts and war cries should not have been able to disturb the mountain itself, but the old shaman nodded. The volcano speaks, Zuluhead said softly, stepping forward so only Doomhammer could hear his words. The spirits within the mountain are pleased. He grinned, baring his worn tusks. They grant us their blessings. Doomhammer nodded. The rock still trembled as he raised his hammer high again, swinging it about over his head. The crowd began to chant his name. Doomhammer! Doomhammer! They shouted, and a loud boom followed their cry. The sky itself turned dark. Doomhammer! They shouted again, and the air turned thick. Doomhammer! They bellowed a third time, and with a loud crack, the mountain behind them exploded, lava and rock spewing forth. The horde's shouts increased, and not out of fear. They, like Zuluhead, saw this as a blessing, the earth itself approving their actions. Doomhammer allowed the tumult to continue for a moment, accepting the sign of respect and loyalty, and building his people's fever to even greater heights. He then pointed north with his weapon. "We march!" he bellowed, "and let the humans tremble at our approach."